Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Threads Cultural Conversations 2024. And today we have a very interesting speaker with us, Daniel Obst, who is President and CEO of AFS Intercultural Programs. Daniel, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's really great to be with you, and I very much look forward to our conversation.
All right, well, let me begin for our audience because they may or they may not be familiar. What is AFS and when was it established?
Thanks so much, Anita. Yeah, AFS has a fascinating story. Right now, AFS is one of the largest international education and intercultural learning organizations, but AFS has a really interesting origin story that I hope I could share with you a little bit. It was started in 1914 during the First World War as the American Ambulance Service. And this was really where young Americans in the United States saw the war in Europe raging and wanted to do something about it and wanted to participate in a humanitarian effort. And so they got together as volunteers, formed a volunteer ambulance corps, raised funds to buy ambulances, and then went to Europe to transport wounded civilians and soldiers as volunteer ambulance drivers. And so this is really how AFS started. In the years between the First World War and the Second World War, the volunteer ambulance drivers decided to support a scholarship program for French and American students at the university level. And then, of course, World War I broke out in 1939, and the American Field Service was reactivated. AFS volunteer ambulance drivers were active all throughout the world, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and of course in Europe. And in 1945, the volunteer ambulance drivers also assisted in the liberation of the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. And so basically, I think the volunteer ambulance drivers who were part of the American Field Service after the war ended really were thinking about, well, what do we do now? You know, we've seen how much destruction a war can cause on humanity, and how do we best preserve peace in the world? And they said, well, instead of building a clubhouse, let's reconstitute ourselves into a program that furthers friendships across nations. And so in 1947, the very first students from around the world came to the United States to live with host families. And they were high school students. And really, the founders of the high school exchange program really believed that this is one of the best ways you can support peace in the world, by creating these friendships and cultural understanding between people.
Lovely. So now let's get into the details. You mentioned volunteering. So our team had many thoughts on this. So let's say, for example, I'm a student in Quito in Ecuador, and I want to come to Canada, somewhere in Canada. So how does this volunteering work? Would I, for example, open my home and volunteer my home for somebody to come? And what about vice versa? If I wanted to go, or somebody that I would like to send, let's say back to Quito, how would that work? And is it all voluntary? I mean, there are no exchanges of money at all in this project? Or how did it, because I think people are put up for quite a while in a home, aren't they? They might go for 6 months. Maybe, I don't know. Tell us more about that process.
Yes, exactly. So I can share basically the way almost we can think about it. It's two types of programs. We so often only talk about the individual participant who goes on an exchange, right? And it's their experience and the impact that they get from that experience. But we also have the host family program, which is almost a program in and of itself. Of course, it's the two coming together. But families also have a real experience in that as well. They're not just hosts for the students. So it's really also a program for families. And the way it really works is that we have, of course, the individual students. They apply for a program. They can apply to multiple different countries, whatever suits them best, or where there are program opportunities available. about 50% of AFS participants around the world receive scholarships to participate in the program, and the other students pay for the program, and the program fees, of course, vary depending on which country you go to or for how long you go. And for the families, so families can apply to participate in the program. And I should say that there's no one type of family. Any kind of family is welcome, and we really promote family diversity across all our programs. So we welcome anyone to participate as a host family. And they open their doors to foreign exchange students. They can host a student for a year. Many of our programs are an academic year in high school, but there are also semester programs or trimester programs. Sometimes families don't want to host quite so long, and then there are either shorter term programs, or some families could even serve as a welcome family for students before they get placed with their full-time families.
Lovely. Well, I think you've given us a wonderful introduction to AFS and to the philosophy behind it, a little bit about how it's evolved across the 20th century and into the 21st. Can we dive in just a little bit into your own personal interest in this? So have you ever been an AFS student? Have you ever hosted anyone? And just what drew you to this? A little bit about your background, maybe that might spur some interest about how you because you're so excited and enthusiastic about it. I just thought we might want to know a little more.
Well, thank you so much for asking. I really appreciate that. And I do have to say I'm excited about it because in a way, this kind of idea of engaging with people across cultures has been something that has been taught to me at a very young age. So I grew up in Germany. I have a German mother and an American father, a US American father. And when I was 6, my parents adopted a 12-year-old refugee boy from Cambodia. And so all of a sudden, I had an older brother who was from a different country, went through a very difficult experience, of course, as being a refugee. And that immediately kind of, forced me to adapt in a different way and to also really experience the joys of having different people from different cultural backgrounds in your family. A few years later, my parents adopted a girl from India and then a boy from Colombia. So I basically grew up in this very multicultural household. We were joking that sometimes around the dinner table, it felt like a mini model United Nations General Assembly meeting or something like that. Yeah. But so that really, I think, shaped my early years, and I was very interested in exploring that further. So I went on an exchange program. I didn't go with AFS, but didn't go with any other organization either. I stayed with my aunt and uncle in Georgia, in the south of the US where they lived. And I spent a year in high school there, which I think really did change my life. I came back to Germany, finished school there, and then came to the US for university, went to England for grad school, and then I moved to New York. This is now 25 years ago. And you mentioned kind of my first job in New York, which was at this tech startup. But it was an online community for young internationals who live, work, or study abroad. And so that gave me the sense of like, I could actually make my personal passion and my life experience also into a career. And so ever since then, I have been committed to international education and really the power that educational and cultural exchanges have to advance peace in the world.
Daniel, that is just so refreshing, that story, because you are truly living and breathing and continuing, how you were raised. And you can see in your enthusiasm that it's just, you fully believe in it and you fully understand the benefits of it because you lived it firsthand. And so we really might call you truly a global citizen. The thing
exactly, and if I can actually, because you ask about kind of global citizenship, and you mentioned it before too, that from my perspective, I think from AFS perspective, is being a global citizen is not about stamps in the passport.
No,
right? It is about your curiosity, about issues that affect the world. It is about being able to relate to others across differences and showing empathy towards others. It's about your willingness to make a positive contribution in your community or in the world. And so that to me is what's so powerful as that's so powerful as being a global citizen, that this is really something that contributes to the world. And I worry sometimes that if we look in the press and how the media talks sometimes about this, that it's almost this binary thing, right? It's like you're either a global citizen or you care about your local community.
That's right. Exactly.
And this is not what that is,
No, as a matter of fact, I might add that I think many of our global leaders and perhaps corporate leaders as well need to go on an AFS long-term exchange. So,
absolutely. And there's all kinds of research that actually shows that corporations kind of when asked what do they look for, what's the most important skill, it's not generally the technical skills, but it's the ability to work with teams that are, with people that are different on the teams, willing to listen to others, work together, all those kind of things that are kind of the adaptability, flexibility, and different tools that you learn on an exchange program is what actually also the private sector and employers really value.
Yeah, very true. Now, the thing that is often challenging, I've lived abroad, so I understand this. When you come back to wherever you're from, it is very hard, though, to communicate your experiences to the local people. They just won't listen, or they won't understand, or they can't, because they haven't been in that situation. So in a way, you feel kind of alone because there's nobody to share it with. But nevertheless, again, in depending on what that person might do for work or how they might live out their life, there is possibility to mesh and merge and interconnect with other people globally. So the question is, do these AFS friendships with family, with all the friends that they meet in new countries, is that a long-standing thing? So at least, you can go back to that country, you can have that, see how people are doing, and forge longer, long-term relationships. Do you see a lot of that happening?
Absolutely. I would say this is, to me, the most beautiful part of the program, right? It's yes, it has a life-changing effect on yourself and on your career trajectory. It will influence everything that you do in life pretty much. But the most powerful thing and the origin story of AFS was around creating friendships and bonds, right, across people and across cultures. And this is what we hear from almost all of our participants, is that they create these lifelong bonds with their families, right? So their host mom and host dad. So someone would refer to as my Canadian mom or my German son or something like that, right? So like you really become part of the family, which means you become part of all their celebrations, whether that's future weddings, funerals, whatever it might be. You are part of that family. And we've seen so many families where there are these multi-generational AFS stories, first of all, right? Like 3 or 4 generations of people who participated in AFS programs, then hosted people, but also multi-generational stories of connection between the participant and the host family, where the sons or daughters of an exchange program participant now is visiting the host parents and grandparents, like that's what's so incredible. So, and we see a lot of that.
My name is Laura Keegan. I use she, her pronouns. I currently live in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty 6, home of the Métis. And I'm thinking back as to when I came across AFS, kind of how it came into the forefront. It was kind of before we did a lot of Googling and searching. And so I recall having some connections in common. And I had done a social work practicum with CUSO, actually. And it was in the offices in Calgary, and they had, there was a woman there that had done a Spanish language program, and that led me to take Spanish classes in Guatemala. And then from there, I was able to apply to AFS and was accepted, and was then sent for 6 months to work in David, Panama. I think I thought a lot about, dancing, which I did a lot of in my time there. But I didn't really know that much about the country. You hear about the Panama Canal, you hear about these sort of iconic pieces of Panama. But the city that I was going to, a city called David, which is near the Costa Rican border, was not, as often happens, is you're not sort of in the main area. You're in smaller centers or smaller hubs. You're not sort of always in, Panama City or places that people think about when they first think of Panama. Yeah, I lived with a woman and her daughter. Her name was Estrellita, and she was my Panamanian mom. She was mama to me, Estrellita, and I formed, it was a really interesting experience to live with a family rather than just traveling on your own or being even in hostels or being with other intercultural people, being just embedded into a family. I got to meet, I had Panamanian brothers. I had my sister, my brothers lived in Panama City, and I could go and stay with them. And we formed these really interesting, truly sibling kind of relationships where we took care of each other and we sort of argued a bit. And it was really great for me, and it allowed me to expand my Spanish, but also see some of the different life experiences that Panamanian families have. And I think people who haven't had an experience where they've been the person who doesn't speak the language or really understand walking into a bank in a new country or a grocery store in a new country, and it's nerve-wracking, and you think, oh, it should be easy. I know how to do this. And I used to tell some of the kids I worked with in Panama, I said to them, I'm really clever in English. I tried to tell them that in Spanish, because you realize that it's so challenging when you're trying to translate and think these things. And I think it's really added an understanding to my patience level when I watch other people when I'm in Canada, seeing, geez, that looks like maybe they don't really understand how the ATM works, instead of just assuming that they're slow or holding you up. And we get very focused in moving through a world very quickly, and can be disregarding of other people's experiences. I learned a lot about the connections and the Indigenous people in Panama. And this was a time, you have to remember, 20 some odd years ago, Canada wasn't speaking as openly about our Indigenous history and our colonial past. And I certainly knew I had white privilege. I grew up with parents that informed me my entire life. I knew that I was privileged. So that alone was a privilege that my parents did that. But I think I had an opportunity to see some injustices there that opened my eyes, that then changed how I returned to Canada, and how that lens then applied itself to how I thought about the First Nations peoples here and the colonial impact for them. A few years ago, I thought I might be in Panama. And so I wrote Estrellita and saying that I was coming, and she just said, "You always have a room." So it's really special. And a friend of mine that we went to Panama together, she was in a different city, and we became very close. And we don't stay in touch regularly, but again, years after we'd been back, she was in Toronto, and I was in Ottawa, and we reconnected. And then again, over the years, just sort of spontaneously, sometimes we'll reach out. So she's still part of my circle of friends, but I would suggest that we're not close in the same way, but those experiences and those relationships formed. they're so impactful, and you're with someone at a really challenging time. And I think that escalates relationships. It makes them harder to break because you shared something so uniquely special.